All right, we are back for another episode. Just me and Ashley, also in like a holiday themed one. So if anyone listened to the spooky one, I don't know, sometimes these get a little unhinged. So maybe this one will be a slightly happier holiday themed one. So we were kind of in this time frame between the Christmas season and New Year's. So this will come out right before 2025. So I just thought it would be a good time to kind of reflect on 2024, some of the highlights in OGX and softball generally, and then looking forward to 2025 and some of the things that we're looking forward to or kind of like hoping happen. So I did a little bit of this. I kind of referenced this when we were talking about NFCA, but I think this time, like starting at NFCA, like Thanksgiving, NFCA going on is like, we have our annual planning we do as a team. This is just a time where we're doing a lot of reflecting generally. Obviously, people are also reflecting like in their lives and stuff this time of year. So I think a quote I use often, I think initially I was introduced to it from Rachel Balkovec. But it's like you overestimate how much you can achieve in a year and underestimate how much you can achieve in 5 years. And I think like it's always so interesting to go back this time of year and just, reflect on the like crazy progress that I think our business has made, but also softball generally. So I think one of the highlights for me is in softball generally, I think we've been talking about in-game data a lot. And I think it's just been really cool. And this year was probably it was definitely the biggest year, but that it's starting to feel like it's at this sort of like this boiling over point where enough people are, having in-game data. They're starting to see the value of it. And then because there's starting to be a threshold of people, we're not as scared of it. So I think people are getting a little more comfortable with the idea of like, what would it look like to share that data? How will we use that data? And so I think that's really exciting because I don't think we're quite there yet, but I feel like we're going to look back next year and the year after and be kind of like shocked by how much we learned and how much access we had because of that. So I think that's one of both reflection of last year and also looking forward into 25 and 26. I think we're kind of on this like threshold with in-game data. So I'm really excited to see what that looks like and what we can learn from it. Because I think there's a lot of stuff, I think where maybe inside OGX, we felt like we're always learning, but some of the like big learning we were doing has slowed down because there's, only so much we can tap into, and things like UNO and that lab accelerate or gave us some new areas to learn. But I think in-game data is that. Like, I'm really excited for us to have new opportunities to learn even more about the game and get better at developing players from it. So that's one of mine.
Okay. Well, before I jump into mine, I will say here, one of my children upstairs having a major meltdown. My husband is up there handling, and definitely I know that you can't hear it.
I can't hear it. Yeah.
There's no promise that won't come tumbling down the stairs in a second.
2 weeks off school is not
just
good.
a real treat.
Mm-hmm.
A real treat.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I thought we'll probably fine, but let me just preface by saying, don't be alarmed if you hear something in the background. I was going to say that my first thought was, it's kind of a piggyback off of yours, Krista, this idea. It's like, I think there's more visibility about the schools at the college level that are using data, how they're using data. We clearly have seen only so many schools have access to in-game data on a regular basis, but the schools that are now prioritizing seeing data, using data on a daily basis is growing. Conversation is more regular. And so I think as a result of that, it's becoming more and more critical at the youth level. Like, for people to know, I need the data. I need to be able to see this. And I just think there's been a real shift recently, meaning like the last couple of weeks, maybe last 2 months. Maybe you've noticed it on some of the like sales calls you do when people are taking these initial intro calls with OGX, but certainly I've had a couple like consulting calls at the youth level recently, which has been something new that we've been doing. Like, hey, they have data, they have a report, and then I have a call with them where I'm like talking to them about what we're seeing and what we should be going after and how to maximize that. And I've definitely seen some sort of shift where athletes are very much understanding that like, I can't be blind to this information. And how they're recognizing that their travel ball coach, for example, is no way is going to be able, like, my travel ball coach is not the way I am going to get recruited. Maybe he or she will help and can speak on my behalf and can help put me in situations like, yeah, of course. However, they're seeing that like, I have to make sure I have the right tools. And I have seen a big shift in conversations like that, in the acknowledgement of that. I've heard a lot of things at the youth level recently. Like I went to this university's camp and they showed us our data and they talked to us about data. And so I think that's been interesting. I definitely don't think that those were conversations I was having in like February of this past year in 2024. Mm-hmm. They've definitely been specific. Now, obviously, we live in a bubble. They're calling OGX because they freaking want to talk about data, you know? Mm-hmm. So this isn't like I'm out on the street and everyone's talking about it. However, we talk to athletes and we have these calls all the time. And I have just noticed, you know, like this shift in what they're here for. It's not just about, I have an injury. It's not, although we obviously get those. It's not just about, I've plateaued, it's performance. There's been very specific talk and conversation about like, I need to know what my data is. I need to know what's good enough, what I should target. And people have been saying a lot of things in assessment debriefs recently of like, we need to make sure we're not spending our time on something that's not worth it. And I think it was last weekend in one of the debriefs that I gave at OGX, someone said like, I've been listening to your podcast, so I'm going to use a phrase you always do because it resonates with me. I want to make sure we're not doing anything that she doesn't actually have access to at the moment. Right. And so like, I'm just hearing those things, and probably maybe this podcast is part of it, right? The more people, like, if they're listening to this podcast, they're getting intrigued. They're thinking, okay, I want this for my daughter. They're getting on the phone with us. They're coming to OGX. But I have seen a real shift in the language, in the intentions of what people want out of OGX. And to me, it's just a good representation of how like data is going to work its way through the youth level. And listen, you do not need to, if you've listened to any other podcast besides like this one, unless this is your first one, like it ain't no secret. Like I think that travel ball is a freaking disaster, right? I mean, I just like, we talk, you know, not to say every single person involved is obviously like a bad person, but the current setup is a disaster. And it is so anti-player development. It is so anti-recruiting. It is so anti-setting these athletes up for like maximizing performance. Forget health for a second, you know? And so I'm so intrigued by this world of like potentially bypassing, right. like bypassing the shit of travel ball, basically. Mm-hmm. Maybe not entirely, but at least some of it, going straight at the truth and then like navigating your own journey from like a college recruiting standpoint and such. And like, I just, that seems to be a world where I think we've got a lot of opportunities moving forward as a community for it to start going in that direction. I'm already starting to hear conversation that is linked to a world like that. So I would say, this is a long way for me to say, one of the things I'm looking forward to in this upcoming year is to feel that movement grow. I think a lot of the movement that we really have created, I'm doing air quotes for anyone who's not, but like this movement we've really been trying to like create really has been a lot at the college level. And it's kind of what I talked about in our podcast, I think last week, where I was like, you know, I felt that on that panel, on that like fireside chat. I felt this like movement. I'm like, we've had something to do with that. We've been like pushing for the conversation. And I think now the next like movement is really coming on like, how does all of this information, how does the tech, how does the data change the way the current youth set up? Also, something to talk about probably is the obviously the rule that just came out was it last week? I don't know. I don't
think they know. I was thinking about recruiting. I think there's two more, and I don't know if this is just something I guess is more of thinking about how it will unfold, but just recruiting in general, and I mean NCAA in general. So there's like all the types of rules that have already come down. The roster changed to 24. So you can, what is interesting about 24 is like, I think it impacts people in different ways, but you could have an SEC school now with 24 full scholarships. And we know that cannot happen at every level. And so I think interesting things about roster sizes are that, you know, some of the ways we have heard coaches that's being enforced, some have over 24. So they are going to have to make cuts. Some have under 24, and their school, not without giving them necessarily 24 scholarships, their school wants them to carry the full roster size now. So there's some push to get to 24 if you're not at 24 from some schools. I don't think that's across the board. And then obviously, if there's going to be schools that get 24 fully funded scholarships, and we know that's not going to be able to happen at many schools, you get this disparity that we're already seeing so much of it starting to grow. And I think it's just starting to, you feel the tipping point coming of like, what the heck even is NCAA sports?
Right.
And I think that's the real, like, I think there's just this like, as soon as NIL, so last year at NCAA was when the NIL rules switched so that the school could pay them directly. Mm-hmm. That almost like doesn't even make sense. I mean, like it is what it is, but like it's now created where schools are, they're not their employees, but they're paying them directly, and they're giving them cars, and they're giving them tickets to games and travel for their family and all of these things. And it's coming directly from the school. So that already is like, was that what we were intending to do? We're getting further removed from like school sports. And then you have the roster stuff coming down. You have this tipping point of like, the fully funded higher revenue schools and how much they're able to afford, and that compared to just like a barely funded, mid-major D1 is almost absurd. So like how we're gonna have to come to some conversation about what that ultimately is going to get to. You had all of the conferences get, realigned. So we're going to see all of that play out this season. And then the rule you're talking about, which I think they haven't quite figured out what it means or how they're going to enforce it, but they gave extra eligibility to a JUCO player. So I believe he was a football player, and he sued to get eligibility. When you come out of JUCO, you normally just get the 2 years, and they said he could have 4 years. So he got his eligibility back. And so I think the NCAA came out and said they're going to give everyone 1 more year. So that's like NCAA and JCAA like came out with a joint statement. But I don't know if that's like, is that what the court meant? Like there's going to have to be some conversation. So obviously even that, if all of a sudden every JUCO softball player that's on a roster gets even 1 more year or whatever, like that shakes things up. Yeah. And so what we've been talking about internally is just like high school recruiting is just starting to become like, what is that even going to look like? Are we even trying to get into like a college sport anymore? Or is there a little part of the college sport that's just a professional sport? It's, it's some sort of professionalized sport. And I think there's just I think we don't know where it's all going to go, but I think there's just tons of, we're definitely on the tipping point of what the heck college sports is even supposed to look like, and what we're doing and how we're paying people and what recruiting is going to look like and how much high school kids are even going to get recruited into those programs. And I think there's a lot to unpack there. So even more reason of all the things you said, like, I think if 2025 is anything for people, it's just like, just follow the best version of you, because you're never going to go wrong with that, and control what you can, and just, you're going to have to let this stuff pan out. So I think that's really interesting. I think another big thing that happened in 24 was the announcement of AUSL. So out of Athletes Unlimited, obviously Athletes Unlimited was meant and designed very initially in 2020 to come after the NWSL season. No, not NWSL, that's soccer. And what was it? NPF. After the NPF season. And then 2020, the pandemic hit, the NPF wasn't super profitable at that point, and they folded. And so now we had, our only pro league was Athletes Unlimited, which was just a 6-week, kind of fantasy style, where everyone switched teams and there were no teams and there are no coaches. And there's, obviously some different rules. It's not a traditional professional league. So that formed, and then we got the WPF. So there are some teams in that's been shuffling around. So people have been pulling out of the WPF. They've been independent. So there's some other professional teams. And so it's just been like disjointed, like obviously Athletes Unlimited gives people opportunity, but it's only a few weeks, and the pay is not nothing, but you have to, like, it's not a full salary. You can't live your whole life, year off of it. The WPF is like unorganized. Basically, that's like, those teams are unorganized. They're not all in this one system. And so Athletes Unlimited announced AUSL, which is 4 teams this year. So there's 4 teams this year. They're rotating, so they're not playing out of like one place, but the goal would be that after this year they would have a home base. So it would be more like a standard professional team that feeds then into the Champions series, or I think that, I can't remember exactly what they're calling it, but that's what we now know as AUSL. So basically this year, I believe all of the people from the 4 teams then are going into that championship league. But I think the vision is that there would be more teams. and then only the best, the top 60 or whatever players would go into that championship league. So I'm really excited for that. I think hopefully there's some teeth behind it. I think they've put really interesting people. There's actual coaches, there's general managers. I think the people they picked are really like big people in our name. There's some like interest there. I think there's hopefully more money behind Athletes Unlimited. They're business people that own it. So there's like incentive that matters. This can't feel like a like charity thing or like something people do on the side. So I think this idea of like professional, making it really professional. So I'm excited about that. I hope we can start to have something sustainable on the professional space. I think the idea of like, sometimes we're in the Olympics, sometimes we're not. We have this professional league that's not super sustainable and no one really like trusts it's going to hang around. It's like what all that looks like. So I'm excited, hopefully, that we can get some sustainability in the pro game. So.
Well, it's my turn again. I got a child creeping down the stairs. Like I just see feet and legs. So we shall see. I was going to comment on, the fact, obviously it's not like the year of the Olympics, but think about the conversations that we've been having on the international with some international teams and how many athletes we've met along the way that have been like, I want to play in 2028. And so this idea of the expansion of the professional level, and us trying to like get it right is so important right now, knowing that we have so many athletes who are out there. Like they need to have the right structure. We're coming in here.
What's up, Griff?
Give me 1 second here. Go ahead, Krista.
In case anyone questions that we're moms, our kids creep in. The holiday break is no good. I actually, I think the next podcast episode will be me and Mike Rathwell from Driveline, and we were planning a time to record. And I was like, my preferred window would be 9:15 to 10:30 on Tuesday when my kids are at camp. This is like basically for this reason. So this is part of the game. Yes. But anyways,
well, it was, to be fair, it was an emergency because a paper mask ripped. So, and no one can find the glue.
How we all survived quarantine? No idea. That's unbelievable to even think about.
We didn't. That version of us is gone.
Yes.
Okay. What I was going to say is that this year is, there's obviously, a lot of effort and energy being put into like how to make some sort of sustainable professional level. And not only that has really been driven from the fact that, okay, the college game is so successful and it's so sad to think about these athletes are finishing their careers and potentially like just starting to hit this to hit a point. I don't want to say their peak. We have no idea what their peak is because we never give them the opportunity. So, but what certainly doesn't look like the end for a lot of athletes, and we just don't have the stage for them. But there's this extra layer now where the preparation for 2028 is underway. And we know that obviously because we've been in talks with some different international teams and either from a training side, a research side, et cetera, on how we can help them through that journey over the next couple of years. And so like these athletes who are no longer in college and are planning to compete in 2028, they need a platform. And a sustainable one, and one that is competitive and keeps them prepared. And so I just think the timing right now with both of those avenues colliding, we've got to get it right. We've got to get it sorted out. And I think now is definitely the time. So I think that's going to be really exciting, knowing that there is pressure coming to like get the professional scene situated, coming from multiple avenues right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think this goes all the way back to the youth conversation. And I think these actually are quite linked. And when you talk about youth sports generally, you have a 5 billion, I think it's more than that, multiple billion-dollar industry in youth sports generally that surrounds itself around kids, that is unregulated by the government. So that in of itself is like, what are we doing? Like that seems insane. And so your only hope to have any regulation in youth sports is that you have a strong governing body that governing body regulates it. And so that's why just generally we know youth sports is kind of a mess because there's no common oversight in the US over youth sports. And so that is what it is. And I don't know, I'm not sure I'm the person to fix all of that, but that is what it is. And then each sport has its own kind of like issues. And it depends a lot on the sort of incentives that come into that sport and the structure that comes into in the governing body. So hockey I'm sure it's very expensive and there's lots of things. I know it has issues. So I always say, when I say, like, when I compare things to sports, there's literally, for my son to, like, if he was going to play travel hockey, it was at 8, we were going to have to do like 3 practices a week and 2 games a weekend. So that in of itself is probably a problem. But what I do know about hockey is that the governing body is super powerful. And so my kids, even in their, like, um, you know, park districts, hockey things they go to for drills, it's all structured. They have to register under USA Hockey. It's all structured in a certain way. Every sort of piece of hockey is regulated within that way. So yes, you still have to assume USA Hockey is making incentivized to do the right thing and making choices. So I'm sure that there are lots of issues with that, and you know, no system is ever going to be perfect. But they have, if they felt like they needed to make a rule change, you know, for something that was going to help the kids or help USA Hockey or whatever, there's a place to implement that is then going to, you know, be followed generally by hockey. When you get to softball, we don't have a strong governing body. That is just the reality. There was probably a time, I think even within our coaching career so far, where USA, and at the time was ASA, softball was more powerful. It was sort of this like governing entity, and that's just not true anymore. Like, they don't have the incentives or the power structure to control the whole sport. And so when you look at youth softball and you try to start to see, like, as you said, it's not that I mean, there are bad players in it, but it's not like everyone's coming into youth softball like with malicious intent, but you just don't have any incentives aligned. And so when you're talking about something like, let's just go pitch counts. Okay, how would we even begin to think about something like pitch counts? We think pitch counts are needed because why? Maybe because we see that there's not enough pitchers at the college level. They're coming in injured. We're seeing you know, an epidemic of youth injuries. We're seeing all these things. I think we see all of that. We have proof of all of that. But who is incentivized to do pitch counts in our current structure? No one. The reason baseball had that, because baseball has a similar kind of hodgepodge of governing bodies, but the reason baseball got pitch counts was because MLB cared. MLB came in and said, we want you to do this. Like, and Pitch Smart is from MLB. There was a professional league sitting at the top of that felt like they had to do something about the youth system to help protect their game. I think there's going to be a similar push like that. MLB just put out a study about all the injuries, and a lot of it was about what was happening to the youth. And so MLB is incentivized to do things like that, to do research on it, to make sure that their game has sustainability. We don't have a pro league like that that's powerful enough or cares enough, is incentivized to do things like that, to come into the youth market, that has had to think like, for our league to be sustainable, like, the thing under it needs to run better. And we also, because the Olympics are in and out and in and out and in and out, USA softball hasn't been incentivized to do that either, because they can't put all that money. It's like, sometimes they're funded, sometimes they're not. There's not this incentive to, like, for them to come in and do those things. And so I think some of that sorting out, this idea of like, can we just get softball for 3 Olympics in a row so it can be there forever? Like, can we try to make some of the change, and then will the top then be incentivized to help us a little bit with the stuff going on in the youth space, to go and say, hey, we think we need to implement pitch counts, or we think we need to change the structure of X. We did a study on all the injury, you know, we funded a study on all the injuries because we need to look at that. We funded a study on how this is impacting the women that we then want to be able to stay in the game. And I just think right now it's really hard to imagine those things happening, because there is just nobody in our game incentivized to do things
it's like the
like
Hunger
that.
Games out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's just, you're asking people who are not in, we don't work like that in the most part. Like, it's so unique to function like that. We're asking people to make choices that are against their
I think what's
incentives.
interesting is where we come in, knowing that people's incentives are not aligned with like what's best for the athletes. Maybe not because they're bad people, but because it's just like they're running a business and their incentives are business related. Then so much of what we do at OGX is to basically like put information on the table that makes you be like, oh man, like it's sort of like immoral for me to keep going down this line with this information in front of me. Like, how can we start and continue?
Well, and you have to, the reason the pro league, and I think that there's like, I don't know where I sit. Like, I think it's a little weird to think high schoolers like really won't get recruited and college sports has moved so far away from being about college at all. Like there's part of me that's like, that doesn't feel like great. But there's also a part of me that's like, the more we can delay that for women, it is different. Like when our sort of like time frame to capitalize on our sport comes from 18 to 22, what youth sports then becomes like that. It's just frantic. It's
rat
frantic
race to be excellent at 16. Okay. On Christmas night, my husband and I were watching, I think it was on Netflix. It was like the Aaron Rodgers documentary. Did you watch that?
I don't think I'll watch that.
Okay. He had it on, and I love football. So
that's not about football, I don't think.
It is. It's really, anyway, it's about like his story. Anyway, regardless of the ins and outs of Aaron Rodgers, I like sport documentaries. Let's leave it at that. And I love sports documentaries, actually. And just getting to like know whether on one side or the other, I just like to kind of like hear the perspective across. And I was just thinking from a football standpoint, I just kicking over your face was so funny. No, I don't think I'll watch that. But I, was just thinking about like they were showing pictures of him in his like collegiate career, and like in fact he didn't like basically he ended up at Cal, but he first
so Tom Brady was like
it was not offered a scholarship. Yes. And then when he first got into the NFL, and just like how is a child, and like the way they talk about him is that's basically like, yeah, he got drafted and he was good and we knew he was going to be good, but also he was still terrible because he was still so young and so inexperienced. And then I was just watching that. So all the other details aside of his story, just that concept, which is kind of consistent across any like male documentary, like the professional athlete, is where no one is necessarily focused on the like how they were when they were 16. A lot of times, there's obviously some freaks out there where it's like they have been the best from the very beginning. But so many of these stories were really centered around like just average people and how they took off after that. And I just was watching that thinking like, this is just so unbelievable to think about how much of an advantage that athletes like this. Now, it's not all athletes, because obviously not all male athletes get that much time. Most male athletes also end at 22. So let me be clear. But the opportunity is out there. Basically, if they don't get beyond 22, it's because they are not at the skill level. And so I was just thinking about like, we have athletes that are at the skill level and potentially haven't even tapped into who they're going to be, because we see this happening on the male side and there just is nowhere for them to go. And so it's just unbelievable that we just push everything back, and now we've got these 15-year-olds. And so what I was explaining to my husband who's next to the couch is like, watching this is just like, what's going on in my brain right now are the conversations that we have with college coaches sometimes that are like, oh yeah, she just doesn't do this well enough, or she doesn't do that well enough. And we're like, well, she obviously will, like we're trying to help them see and like objectify, have some sort of objective measurement for like the risk reward, or like, her potential and what we think she's likely going to pan out to be. But it's just like wild sometimes. And it can often be frustrating for us for when someone says something, I'm like, because that is a very, like, that is a mature craft, a concept that's a part of a very mature craft. And like, she's 15. She's not, her craft is not matured yet, And so across the board that we just expect like someone of that age. And I was just thinking about, we're talking about
even crazier for women, as we know, because of what puberty like does to us. And this idea that you're like that gets spun in there, like it's just a mess. I've talked about it before, but Tanner Hawk went to my high school, and I think it's the most like obvious story, and also like just insane for women, that he was a good pitcher in high school, but he wasn't that good. He was above average. He was a person you'd notice. He threw hard, but I think probably like 90, low 90s, or 90 or something, like 89, whatever you throw in high school, that's good. And, I think like people knew he was good. They knew he had a lot of upside, but it wasn't like at that moment in time, he threw all these things and would have gone to the MLB and been successful. Like he was none of those. And he's one of the top 10 pitchers in the MLB right now. And he's 25 probably now or something, like, and he's he throws super hard. He has all these pitches. Like he has transformed now into someone who legitimately is the top 1% of baseball players in the country, but he wasn't that in high school. Like that is ridiculous. And so I think that whole concept of like, I don't know that where college sports is going is like the best solution to provide this. I think there's a whole thing about that. But I do think this idea of just like buying women some time in the game is just really powerful. Of like, we don't have to peak.
Is it more eligibility? Is it the professional career afterward? The Olympics,
It's like we don't have to peak, nor should you peak. That's literally will destroy your body and make it less likely that you will peak if your goal is to peak early.
Totally.
Like it's just a disaster.
I can't help but go back to the freaking 11-year-olds because Godspeed to all of us with this next comment and the wrath that we may get if Paul decides to clip this and put it out there. But not only do I obviously stand 1,000,000% behind the fact that there's not a single 11-year-old out there with a craft for pitching because they should not. But the fact that there is any discussion that all of this fits in. The fact that people were even uncomfortable with hearing like there's no pitching craft. You're not even on the same scale of what the craft actually entails. Like the fact that there's like this, like, no, like, yes, they do this, they do, because it's this sense of like panic, urgency. It all fits into this conversation. It's like, no. I'm not saying like, oh, all those idiot 11-year-olds out there. It's like, no, nor should they. Why in the world? Not only do they not have a craft when it comes to pitching, not only is it not mature, it should not be. Let us all just sit back and agree that it's not there, nor should it be. And we probably, it's like last week we had somebody who was a freshman in high school, 2028, and they were like, we wish you found us earlier. I'm like, I don't.
Perfect time.
You just started pitching. I know you think you've been pitching for 38 years already, but in my mind, it didn't even start yet. You're literally in like step number 1 of pitching. I don't think pitching starts before 14, 15 years old. It just doesn't. It's a totally different skill until that point. And obviously it's not chronological age. So I'm giving some sort of generalization here, but it doesn't start until about that age. So I'm like, no, she didn't even start yet. So this is where that comes from. And the travel ball world just feeds off of that shit. Oh my God, they just love it because they're like, you need to spend $8 billion this year on the following tournaments and skill session showcase, whatever the hell.
Or they don't know. It's a combination of things. It's like, I think there is both the incentives are not right. So the incentive is, my incentive as a org leader, tournament director, whatever, is to make everyone feel like they're like trying to be the best on the best team and do the right things and all of that. And then in addition to that, a lot of those same players just, really don't know. And so like we give the example of, a kid hits puberty a little early, maybe like, between 8 and 10, and then is the best at that age and stays the best probably till like 12, and then doesn't even realize like, no, you are that's it without training and without changing body mass, without getting stronger. Like that's what you're going to be. And no one's telling you. And so you still think I'm the best, pitcher or hitter or whatever, I'm the best, because you probably will be for a little bit. And then all of a sudden 13, 14, 15 comes and you're like, what the heck happened? And to be honest, I don't think always that the people around them know either. They're just like, I don't know, you just didn't keep getting better. Like, and it's like, well, it was actually quite predictable exactly what happened. And if we all were educated enough about development, about what we see going through puberty, and about how that impacts, then we could have that real conversation. But again, I think all the way to the beginning. So I think there's a lot that's going to, I think we're just like, we're teetering right on the edge of a lot of things.
Let's be clear, because this is not all coming down in 2025. This is
it's going to be the next few years. Yeah.
Yes.
But the NCAA, what that looks like, the pro league, what that's going to look like. This is obviously now an Olympic cycle. So that feeds different things in our game. Hopefully we'll be on multiple Olympic cycles, but Olympic cycle in the US, which is cool. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of like things in these next few years that are really like going to be exciting. So I think that, I think it's just
you can
really
feel, obviously none of that is all coming. It's not like all of this is going to happen in 2025, but you can feel that this year almost feels like it feels like the year or like somewhat of a start of where these worlds are starting to collide and push.
Yeah.
And that's what it really feels like. And so I think this idea of new year, yes, I'm not saying like on January 1st, this is when we're going to start, but like this idea of like this, it feels like we're starting an era where we're starting to push. I like that concept that you keep saying of like buy women more time. I'm like, that's definitely going to be a t-shirt of some sort. We're going to have to come up with some phrase. That's definitely like an OGX, but there's some concept of that. There's like buy women more time in the game.
All the pitchers that were, whether it was Daniel Laurie, Kat Osterman, Monica Abbott, all these. Ueno was in the Olympics too, still, right? And was not her last one too? I'm pretty sure. So like all of these, like the best pitchers in the last Olympics were like 40, you know, or they were our age now, which is almost like insane to think about. But they all were performing and they all were performing at great levels, you know? So I just think like we know there is, and that's with limited resources, lack of availability of training, lack of money to support their thing like that. And that was with that, they were still able to perform at that high of a level. So I think like, we just don't even know.
No.
We don't even know
in summary,
we don't even know.
We know how not only can we not expect like athletes to be at their best in these very young, immature chronological ages, the skill of our game is such a physically mature concept that it's like what we would love to see is for the game to essentially like on this scale to get pushed back like later so that these early phases do not feel as if like I'm already in the hunt.
I'm in the race. Yeah. And I think it's just, I think that it matches the stuff we're able to do with Driveline. It matches the stuff we're able to do with UNO, which is like, we don't even know. We just don't even know what women are capable of in softball. We don't know how hard they can pitch. We don't know how hard they can throw overhand. We don't know how hard they hit because we keep kind of beating that threshold of what we thought. It's just like, it's not that uncommon now to see 72, 73, 74. You have, I shouldn't say it's not that uncommon. At the very, very highest level of the game, it's not impossible to see those numbers. We've already had the conversation about exit velo. You know, Katie Stewart's been in this week. I don't think she's hit 90, but she's hit 89. Like, I think, you know, we are, and that seems crazy to even think about at one point, whether they could do that. We just don't know yet. And so the more we learn about how to develop what is good, what is working, you know, we get better at that sort of iteration process. We get better at the feedback loop with athletes. And then we have more time with those athletes. That combination of things. It's like, geez, I mean, I just don't think you even
absolutely. And also like we're making these like thresholds, whether it's like max or what's elite levels based off of athletes that are 18 to 22.
Totally.
So there's just a reality of where like, not only is data allowing us and training and like the understanding of these two concepts coming together is allowing those thresholds to grow. But imagine now if athletes are able to stay in the game longer, you don't think those thresholds are going to start budging when now we're measuring this off of 27, 28, 29, forget it. Right. And so like, we're not there yet, but hopefully we will be.
Yeah.
I think you're right. This is you overestimate what you can do in a short time, whether it's a day, a year, whatever, and you underestimate. So I wonder if this time next year, we're going to be like, we're still so early on in this phase, but then another 5 years, like, yes, look at all that the game has done to really like make huge change. Huge change is coming. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you just feel it from the seats that we're in. You can feel it, how much will actually happen in this single year, 2025, to be determined, but definitely huge changes coming. And I think for all the reasons we just talked about and in all the directions, it's like important. They're all connected. So, you know, it obviously is kind of start in one area, which puts pressure on another. It's going to be interesting to see. I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right. Well, here's to 2025.
2025.
I mean, another great year. We'll be coming back. And pretty soon we'll be talking about college games. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
As we get into 2025 to start the season. So, like I said, I think next week will be me and Mike chatting, so that should be a good one. And then, we'll see you in 2025.
Happy New Year, everybody.